Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial where we will have a look at how you can implement Lightning in your web app. We'll be using the package WebLN, which you can find on npm. And in this package, you will be able to connect to your Lightning provider. And once you're connected, you will have access to a bunch of different functions, such as send payments, makeInvoice, sign messages, and so on. And we'll be going through all of these functions in this tutorial step by step, with as little code as possible. So without further ado, let's get into it. You can fire up VS Code or your favorite editor. What I have in here is just an empty React project with nothing but a headline. And the first step for us is to install the WebLN package. So I'm just going to type npm install WebLN in the console. And once that is complete, we'll head into the browser because we need a Lightning provider, and I will be using Alby. And if you want to do that too, you can head into getalby.com and just walk through the install steps. And once you're done, you will see this little icon up here in the corner, which will give us all the functionality we need for this tutorial. All right, but let's have a look at the package. So the first thing we want to do is to connect to the Lightning provider. And we'll do that with the function requestProvider. So let's head back into VS Code. And at the very top, let's import that function. So import, and in curly brackets, requestProvider from WebLN. We need to call this request provider an async function because it returns a promise. So let's create one. Let's call it async function load request provider. It doesn't take any arguments. And all we have to do in here is just create a constant, which we can call WebLN. And that will be equal to await request provider, which we just imported, like that. We can also console log this WebLN to see what we get out of it. And the last thing we need to do is just call the function, and we'll do that with a simple button. So let's create that down here. We can say connect to provider, and in here we'll call onClick and say load request provider. All right, let's save that file and run npm start. This will take us to our browser, and you can see our headline and the button we just created. So let's bring up the console as well and try to click on this button. And this will prompt Alby to open up in a new window where you want to log in. And now you see the console log. So we see that the provider is enabled. And we also see that the Get Alby icon has become green, which means that it has access to the site. So this is the behavior that we expected. All right, so let's go back to the package documentation. And now that we have access to the provider, we also have access to all of these functions. So let's begin at the top. It's called enable, and it determines if the WebLN provider will allow the page to use it or not. So let's try it out. We head back into VS Code, and in the load request provider, we'll just create a new constant. We can call it enabled, and that will be equal to just await WebLN, which is the constant we created up here, and just dot the function that we want to use, which in this case is enable, and without any arguments, just like that. And below here, we can just console log this enabled constant and see what happens. Let's save this file, go back into the browser, connect, and now we see we have two logs. The first one is the same as before, but now we also have this enabled true. which can be a neat little function if you want to do some tests in your code where you have a bigger project. All right, we'll go back to documentation and see that the next one is getInfo. And this function returns some basic information about the node. So let's try it out. We can do like this. We delete these 3 lines. Don't really need them anymore. And here we create a new constant. We can call it node info. And it's the same as before, just await WebLN dot get info this time. No arguments. And let's just console log this to see what we get. Save the file, head back into the browser, click the button, and now we see a different message. Now we see that we get a node, and in this node we got an alias. And this is the alias of the node that we're connected to through our provider, which in this case is getalbi.com. So that works as we expected it to. But let's add a little bit more code. Let's try to get this information out on the web page. And in order to do that, we need to create a state, because we can't access the constants in this function down here. So up in the very top, we need to import useState from React. And below the initialization of the function, we'll just create a new state. We can call it node info, and also the setState function, which we can call set node info. And this will be equal to useState with an empty string as the initial state, just like that. And now instead of console logging node info in here, we can call set node info with node info. And now we'll have access to this constant down here. And what we can do is just create a paragraph. And in here we can say connected to, and then in curly brackets, we'll call this node info. Right, we'll save this, head back into the browser, and now you see the text here, and when we click the button, we get an error. Oh yeah, of course. Now I tried to bring the whole object in there, but we just need the alias. So let's head back into VS Code, and instead of setting node info like this, we instead want to go into the node and into the alias. And we do that by just writing nodeinfo.node.alias. Let's save and see if it works better. Connect to provider, and here we go. So now we see which node we're connected to. Okay, the next one we have is sendPayment. But as we see here, it requires an input field, which is a payment request of the type string. And from the makeInvoice function, that's exactly what we get back. So let's do the makeInvoice first. And as you see here, the makeInvoice function prompts the user to provide a page with an invoice. And it takes a couple of different input arguments, which are all voluntary. So you don't need anyone if you don't want to. And it will return a request invoice response. So let's just, for the sake of the tutorial, do at least one of these so you see how it works. So let's take the number, which will determine how many sats the invoice shall consist of. So in order to take an input from the user, we will need a form. So let's begin with creating that. So we head into VS Code, and below our paragraph, we'll type form, close it up. And in this form, we'll have just one input field. We can type like this, close it up. And then here, we'll just say that the type that we want is number. And when the user types something, we want to save that in a state. And the syntax for that is like this. We have an anonymous function and we need to set the state. We'll just call it setAmount with the e.target.value, which is what the user types into the field. And the value in our field will be the amount, which we will soon create. We'll also set this field to required. All right, so let's create this state. We'll do that up at the other state. So say const, we call it amount, and then set amount. And this will be equal to use state. And instead of an empty string, we'll just have 0, since we're expecting a number. All right, so what else do we need to do? We will need to have a button. And we'll do that below the input field. So let's just have a button here. We can call it create invoice. And the final thing we need to do is create a function which is called when this button is pressed. So we'll do that below the load request provider function we created before. And this function will also be async. And we can call it handle invoice. And this will take an argument, just the e, which is the value from the field. And this is just some basic syntax for React forms, where we have to prevent default, like that. And now we can call our makeInvoice function. And we'll do this by creating a constant again. We call it invoice, and this will be equal to await WebLN dot makeInvoice. And in as an argument, we'll pass in the amount which the user has specified within the input field. Let's just try to console log this invoice and also connect this handle invoice function to our form. And we'll do that by typing on submit handle invoice. All right, this looks pretty good. Oh, no, I missed one thing. We won't be able to access the WebLN constant within this function, since it's created up in here. So we'll need to create a state for that as well. So let's head up to the other states. And here we can create the WebLN constant, set WebLN. This will be equal to use state. And here we can just have an empty string as well. And now we also need to set the state. And we'll do that within the load request provider. To set WebLN with WebLN. Alright, so that should enable us to access it from here. And that should be it. Let's save this file. We got no errors. Let's head into the browser. And now we see that we have this input field. So we begin to connect with our provider again. Works fine. And then we can type how many sets we want the invoice to be. Let's try 10. Click create invoice. And now we get prompted into this other view with Albi, where it says create invoice, the amount we specified, and who wants to create it, and that's the local host, which is us. And we also have the option to create a memo. So let's just do that. Right, test, confirm, and down here we see the console log with a payment request and also a hash. All right, so that looks pretty good. Let's head back into the documentation. and try to send payment next. So this will take as an input what we got out from the invoice, this field, the payment request. So let's head back into VS Code and implement this. Should be pretty straightforward. So what we need is just a new function which calls this sendPayment function and a button to call it. All right, so let's begin with the function. This will also be async. We can call it handle payment. It will not take any arguments. And in here we can just say await WebLN, which we have access to now. Send payment, was it? I have to double check. Send payment, yeah. So the only thing we need now is the payment request string, which we have in this invoice. But to get access to it, we'll need to create a new state. So let's do that up here. Call it payment request and set payment request. And this can be equal to useState and just an empty string. That's the initial state. And below this console log, we can just say set payment request with invoice.payment request. And now, as the input argument in the send payment, we'll just have payment request, which we have in our state. Okay, the final thing is just a button to call this function. Let's do it beneath the form. Button, pay invoice, and the on click will prompt our handle payment function. If I can spell it, handle payment. All right, let's save it. It looks good. We can head back into the browser. Connector provider. Let's create an invoice. And then try to pay this invoice. All right, so now we get prompted into a new window, approve payment. And you see who made the invoice and also how many sats it is. And I didn't set a description this time, so I guess this is a standard description from Albi. And yeah, let's just pay it. We see that I don't have enough balance, which is to be expected because I'm broke. So let's just cancel this down. But that worked as expected. So let's just head back into the package documentation and see what we have left. Okay, so we made an invoice, sent payments. Okay, we have this key send payment function. And I haven't been able to get this to work. Probably because I don't really understand the key send arguments and what it expects. But if anyone who sees this video knows how it works, please let me know in the comment section and I'll do another video about this function at another time. Alright, so let's head down the list to signMessage. This function prompts the user to sign a message with their private key and it takes a message as an input argument of the type string. So we'll need to create another form. So let's head back into VS Code and let's just tidy this up a little bit. We can create a couple more headlines just to make it a little bit easier to see where we're coding. So this is the create invoice. And below the form we can say create another headline and say pay invoice. And below this button we just create another headline where we say sign message. Let's just save that, have a look. And now we have these headlines to separate them a little bit. Alright, back to the code. So we need another form, so we can just copy the form we previously made. So copy that, head back all the way down and below signMessage. And in here, we just need to change a few things. We of course need to create a new function, but we'll do that later. First, we'll change this number to string because we're expecting a message. And instead of set amount, we'll say set message. This is a new state which we will create soon, but that can stay the same. And the value can instead be message. And the button can say, instead of create invoice, we can say sign message. All right, so let's create this message state. So we head back up, say const, let's say message, set message, which can be equal to use state, and can just be an empty string, like that. So now we need to create a new function, which will be very similar to the handle invoice. So we can copy that one, just head down, paste it in, and change the name from handle invoice to handle signature, maybe, like that. We'll still have this constant, but let's just delete all of this and write it again, because we will be a little bit different. Okay, so let's create this signature constant. And we will access this by calling await WebLN dot, what's the name again? signMessage. Yeah. signMessage, which will take into the message which we have in our state, and then just console log signature to see what it looks like. And now the final thing before we can test this out is just connect this function to the form, which we do down here. Instead of handle invoice, we say handle signature. All right, so this looks pretty good. Let's save it and head back to the browser. And now we see this new input field. And we need to connect to the provider, but we don't need to create an invoice. We can just type in a message, let's say lightning rocks, and sign the message. And this will prompt Alby to open up another window, which is called sign, which just says the message that you want to sign, and you can just click confirm. And you see that we get back a signature. All right, so that looks good. Let's head back into the documentation, see what we have left. So it's just verifyMessage that remains. So yeah, let's just dive into that one. We see that the input is the message that we just created, and also the signature that we got back from signMessage. So this should be pretty straightforward. We can create a new function, async function, we can call it verifyMessage. It doesn't need any arguments. And all we have to do in here is just create a new constant that we can call verification, maybe, which will be equal to await WebLN dot verifyMessage. Was it? I think. Yeah. And the first one is the signature and second is the message. All right. So we need a signature and a message. Right, so we see here that it can find a message but not the signature. So we need to create a state for that as well. So head up here, create a new state called signature, set signature, can be equal to use state, and just an empty string as the initial state. And here, instead of console logging, let's just set signature with signature. Wait, was it, let's see what we got back. Yeah, so it's first an object and then the signature, so we need to tap into that one. So signature.signature. Okay, so now we have access to it, and we can just console log whatever we get back here. Like that. The final thing we need to do is just call this function somewhere. So let's just create another button at the very bottom. It's too much. Button at the very bottom. Okay. Verify message. On click. And we call it verify message. Okay, let's save this, see if it works. No errors. We see our new button down here. So what we need to do is just connect to provider, sign a new message, yes, confirm, and then click verify. And we see that we get back valid equals false, and there's no errors or anything like that. And this is the behavior I always get. You would expect Albi to prompt up a new page where you get to verify the message, because that's what it says here in the documentation. But we never see that view. So it might be that Albi has not implemented this function yet, or maybe it is that I don't understand the input fields right. If anyone knows what's up here, please let me know, and I'll create a new video about that in the future. But apart from that, I guess we've gone through all of these functions. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you now know a little bit more about WebLN and how to connect your web app to Lightning. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one. Bye!